Hi, it's Kirkin Carp. This is our new story. Enjoy watching.
Red wine dripping down my face, expensive Merlot soaking into my silk blouse, a young blonde woman screaming that her husband owns this restaurant and she can throw out anyone she wants. 50 people staring at me like I was the evening's entertainment. And all I could think in that moment was, that wine is going to stain. And I really loved this blouse. I didn't scream back. I didn't cry. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just wiped my face slowly with a napkin, looked at her one last time, and said the only thing worth saying. I hope that made you feel better. Then I picked up my purse, apologized to my client for the disruption, and walked out of that restaurant with whatever dignity I had left. My name is Gwyneth Carradine. I'm 34 years old. And that woman who just humiliated me in front of a packed restaurant? She's my ex-husband's new wife? The restaurant she was screaming about? The one she claims is hers? I designed every inch of it. I funded it. I built it with 7 years of my life. But let me back up. Because this story doesn't start with wine in my face. It starts almost 10 years ago, when I was young and stupid and believed that love was enough. I met Garrett Holloway at a food festival when I was 25, fresh out of design school, full of dreams, absolutely certain that the world was going to be kind to me. He was 32, a sous chef at a mid-level restaurant, and he had this way of talking about food like it was poetry. He told me about his dream of opening his own place someday, a real restaurant, something with soul. I fell for him completely. We got married within a year. When my grandmother passed away, she left me $180,000, her entire life savings. Grandma Eileen had been a retired accountant who survived a brutal divorce back in the 70s. Her first husband had hidden everything and left her with nothing. She spent the rest of her life being careful with money, documenting everything, trusting no one completely. She never liked Garrett. Said he was too charming, just like your grandfather was. I thought she was being paranoid, old-fashioned, overly cautious. When I told her I wanted to use the inheritance to help Garrett open his restaurant, she didn't say no, but she insisted on what she called a small formality. She made us sign a promissory note with some legal language about equity stakes and ownership percentages. I was 25 and in love. I signed it without really reading it, filed it away with old tax returns and birthday cards, and forgot it existed. Grandma died 3 years later. Heart attack in her sleep. Peaceful, they said? I cried for weeks, but I never thought about that document again. I was too busy building the amber table. That was the name of Garrett's dream. I designed the entire interior, the warm lighting, the exposed brick, the amber-colored glass fixtures that gave the place its name. I created the logo, the menus, the brand. I worked 16-hour days alongside him for 3 years while the restaurant struggled to find its footing. I didn't take a salary. I didn't ask for credit. I believed we were building something together. And then, finally, it worked. Year 4, we turned profitable. Year 5, we got featured in a local magazine. Year 6, we expanded the dining room. By year 7, the Amber Table was the most talked about restaurant in the city. That's also the year Garrett started working late. I found the texts on his phone by accident. I wasn't even suspicious. I just picked up the wrong phone when mine buzzed. Her name was Brittany. She was 24 years old, blonde, and she'd been working as a waitress at our restaurant for 6 months. Our restaurant. That's what I still called it then. Garrett didn't even apologize properly. He said we had grown apart. He said he needed something different. He said it wasn't my fault, which is what people say when it's absolutely your fault, but they don't want to feel guilty. He filed for divorce. His lawyer was expensive and aggressive. Mine was what I could afford, which wasn't much. During the proceedings, Garrett showed financial documents claiming the restaurant was barely breaking even. $30,000 a year in profit, he said. The business was struggling, he said. There wasn't much to divide. I knew it was a lie. I'd seen the reservations, the crowds, the expansion. But proving it would have required a forensic accountant, and forensic accountants cost $10,000 minimum. Money I didn't have. Money I couldn't borrow. So I settled. $40,000 and our modest house, with its modest mortgage. He kept the restaurant. All of it. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, he married Brittany. She posted the wedding photos on Instagram with a caption that said, "Blessed beyond measure." I saw it because I was weak and looked. Then I blocked them both and promised myself I'd move on. That was 14 months ago. I thought I had moved on. I was rebuilding my design business slowly, taking small clients, paying my bills, trying not to think about the life I'd lost. My cat became my only dinner companion, which honestly was an upgrade. Unlike Garrett, she actually listened when I talked, and she never once told me to calm down, which automatically made her better company than most men I'd dated. So, how did I end up at the amber table on that particular night, getting wine thrown in my face? I had a meeting with a potential client. Raymond Talbot, 58, owned a chain of boutique hotels and was looking for a designer to renovate his newest property. This was the biggest opportunity of my struggling career. His assistant made the reservation at the most talked about restaurant in town. I didn't know where we were going until my taxi pulled up and I saw the sign. My stomach dropped. I almost told the driver to keep going, but I couldn't cancel on this client. So I went inside, requested a corner table, and prayed I could get through dinner without being noticed. I almost made it. Brittany spotted my name on the reservation list. I learned later that she'd spent months stalking my social media during and after the affair. She knew exactly what I looked like. She'd been studying me the way insecure women study the women who came before them. She waited until I was mid-conversation with Raymond, then approached our table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Asked if I was enjoying her restaurant. I stayed polite, said the food was lovely, hoped she'd walk away. She didn't. She escalated, called me pathetic, said I had some nerve showing my face here. Then she grabbed my wine glass and threw it directly at my face. The whole restaurant went silent. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have told everyone within earshot exactly who built that restaurant and who paid for it. But I didn't. I just wiped the wine from my eyes, looked at her calmly, and walked out. Raymond followed me outside. He insisted on paying for my dry cleaning. He apologized like it was his fault, and he looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: respect. I went home that night in wine-stained clothes, thinking I had healed from all of this. The incident proved me wrong. The wound was still open, still raw, still bleeding. But something else woke up inside me too. Something that had been sleeping for 14 months. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't self-pity. It was clarity. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment, and your support means more than you know. Now, back to the chaos. The video appeared online 2 days later. Someone at the restaurant had recorded the whole thing. Of course they had. Everyone has a phone now, and public humiliation is content. The clip showed Brittany throwing wine in my face, showed me sitting there stunned, showed me walking out with my head held high. It got posted to TikTok with the caption, "Rich wife throws wine at mystery woman at fancy restaurant." Within 48 hours, it had 200,000 views. Local news picked it up. There were think pieces about restaurant drama and jealous wives and women supporting women, except nobody knew who I was or why any of it happened. The comments were split down the middle. Half the people called Brittany a queen protecting her territory. The other half called it assault and said I should press charges. Nobody asked for my side of the story. I was just the mystery woman who got wine thrown on her, a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Then Garrett released his statement. He posted it on the restaurant's Instagram account. Very professional, very polished, clearly written by a publicist. It expressed regret that his ex-wife chose to visit their establishment and cause a scene. It explained that his wife was simply defending their family from harassment. It wished me well and hoped I would find peace. I read it 3 times. Each time, I felt something tighten in my chest. He made me sound crazy, obsessive, the bitter ex-wife who couldn't move on, and because he had the platform and I didn't, his version became the truth. The calls started coming after that. My mother telling me I should have known better than to go there. Former friends suggesting maybe I was being that kind of ex-wife. A cousin I barely talked to sending me an article about how to heal from divorce with a note that said "thought of you." Nobody asked what actually happened. Nobody wondered why a woman who hadn't contacted her ex-husband in over a year would suddenly show up at his restaurant to cause trouble. The story was already written, and I was the villain. I spent a week in a fog, working on small projects, feeding my cat, trying to convince myself that this would blow over and everyone would forget. I deleted my social media because the notifications were making me sick. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Then Raymond Talbot called. I almost didn't pick up. I assumed he was calling to cancel our contract. Why would a successful hotel owner want to work with the crazy ex-wife from the viral video? I braced myself for polite rejection. Instead, he said something I didn't expect. "I'm giving you the hotel project. But that's not why I'm calling." He asked if I had time to meet for coffee. No pressure, no agenda, just a conversation. I said yes because I had nothing left to lose. We met at a small cafe far from downtown. Raymond ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. He told me that 8 years ago, his younger sister, Catherine, went through something almost identical. She'd been married to a man who owned a chain of dry cleaners. When they divorced, he showed the court falsified records claiming the business was failing. Catherine got almost nothing. She spent years struggling while her ex-husband lived large. Then, 2 years after the divorce, Catherine found a document she'd forgotten about, a loan agreement that proved she'd invested her own money into his business. She took it to a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of case, a lawyer who works on contingency, because they know that when fraud is provable, they always win. Raymond slid a business card across the table. The name on it was Noreen Cassidy. I stared at the card for a long moment. Part of me wanted to take it immediately. Part of me wanted to push it back and say I was done with all of it. I told Raymond I wasn't sure I wanted to go backward. I'd spent 14 months trying to move forward. Opening this up again meant reliving everything. The betrayal, the divorce, the humiliation. What if I lost? What if he used his money and his lawyers to destroy me completely? What if there was nothing to find and I just ended up looking bitter and pathetic? Raymond didn't push. He just said that his sister asked herself the same questions, and then she decided that the truth mattered more than the risk. I took the card. That night, I sat in my apartment and thought about why I'd never investigated Garrett's finances before. The answer was simple and painful. I couldn't afford it. Forensic accountants charge $5,000 to $15,000 minimum. Good divorce attorneys want $10,000 retainers just to start. After the divorce, I could barely make rent. I had suspicions, plenty of them, but suspicions don't pay for experts. A contingency lawyer changed everything. If Noreen Cassidy took my case, I wouldn't pay unless we won. For the first time since the divorce, the door was actually open. I called her office the next morning and made an appointment. Just a consultation, I told myself. I wasn't committing to anything. I was just asking questions. I spent the 3 days before the meeting preparing like I was taking the bar exam. I read every bank statement I'd kept 3 times each. I organized files by date, made color-coded tabs, created a timeline of our marriage and business on a legal pad. I wasn't this prepared for my own wedding. Then again, maybe that had been the problem all along. That week, I also started keeping a dedicated folder. Every screenshot I could find, every receipt, every financial document that crossed my path. My grandmother always used to say that paper remembers what people choose to forget. I never really understood what she meant until I needed it to be true. Noreen Cassidy's office was not what I expected. No fancy downtown high-rise, no leather furniture, no wall of intimidating law degrees, just a modest suite in a professional building with clean carpets and organized files. A woman who clearly spent her money on work, not appearances. Noreen herself was 49, sharp-eyed and direct. No small talk, no pleasantries beyond a firm handshake and an offer of water. She sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and said 4 words that set the tone for everything. Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. So I did. The whole story from the beginning. Meeting Garrett, falling in love, investing my grandmother's money, building the restaurant, 7 years of marriage. discovering the affair, the divorce, the settlement, the viral video, the wine in my face. I talked for almost an hour. Noreen took notes and asked sharp questions but never interrupted the flow. When I finished, she put down her pen and asked the question that changed everything. How exactly did you give him the money? I explained that my grandmother left me $180,000. I gave it to Garrett to open the restaurant. Noreen leaned forward. Was there any documentation? Any written agreement about the investment? I started to say no. We were married. Why would there be? But then I stopped, because there was something. A memory surfaced, fuzzy at first, then clearer. Grandma Eileen sitting at her kitchen table, sliding a document across to me, insisting I sign it before she'd write the check. I told Noreen about my grandmother, how she'd been an accountant her whole life, how her first husband had hidden assets during their divorce in 1973 and left her with nothing, how she'd spent the rest of her life being careful, documenting everything, trusting no one completely, especially not charming men. When I asked for my inheritance early, Grandma agreed, but she insisted on what she called a small formality, some kind of promissory note with legal language I didn't understand and didn't bother to read. I was 25, madly in love, absolutely certain my marriage would last forever. I signed it, filed it with old papers, and forgot it existed. Grandma passed away 3 years later. She never reminded me about the document. Maybe she assumed I'd remember when I needed it. Maybe she trusted me more than I deserved. Noreen's expression changed. She asked if I still had that document. I honestly didn't know. It had been almost 10 years. I'd moved twice since then, but I thought it might be in storage with the boxes I'd labeled Grandma's stuff and never properly sorted through. Noreen told me to find it. Whatever else I was doing, finding that document was now my priority. I went home and spent the entire weekend searching. My apartment became a disaster zone of cardboard boxes and old papers, tax returns from years ago, birthday cards I'd saved for no reason, photos from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I almost gave up twice. My back hurt, my eyes were tired, and I was starting to think the document had been thrown away years ago in some cleaning purge I couldn't remember. Then, in the last box, underneath my grandmother's recipe collection and a stack of angry letters she'd written to Nixon but never mailed, I found it. A single page, slightly yellowed at the edges, dated almost 10 years ago. The language was formal, typed on what looked like a template, but the signatures at the bottom were handwritten, mine and Garrett's. I read it slowly this time. Really read it. The document was a promissory note acknowledging receipt of $180,000 for investment in a restaurant venture to be established. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was a clause halfway down the page. In consideration for this investment, recipient agrees that investor shall hold 40% equity stake in the business upon establishment. 40%. My grandmother hadn't given Garrett money. She'd made him agree that I owned almost half of whatever we built with it, and she'd had the whole thing notarized by her attorney friend, making it legally binding. I sat on my floor surrounded by boxes and cried. Not sad tears, just overwhelming ones. My grandmother had protected me from beyond the grave, and I'd been too young and stupid to even realize it. I brought the document to Noreen the next day. She read it twice, then sat back in her chair and said something I'll never forget. Your grandmother was a very smart woman. Then she explained what the document meant in legal terms. This wasn't just about Garrett being dishonest during the divorce. This was about him being legally obligated to register me as a 40% owner of the Amber table. He never did. Instead, he claimed 100% ownership when the restaurant was incorporated. Then he claimed that same 100% during our divorce proceedings, showing the court financials that made the business look nearly worthless. What he did wasn't just unfair, it was fraud, possibly theft, definitely actionable. But there was a complication, Noreen said. To prove the value of what Garrett stole from me, we'd have to prove the real value of the business. He'd showed the court during divorce that the restaurant made $30,000 a year in profit. If we proved it actually made much more than that, we wouldn't just be proving divorce fraud. We'd be proving he underreported income to the court. And if he underreported income to the court, he probably underreported it to the IRS too. Noreen looked at me directly. Are you prepared for where this might go? I understood what she was asking. Did I want justice badly enough to potentially send my ex-husband to prison? I thought about it. I really did. Part of me still remembered the man I'd married, the one who made me laugh, who talked about food like poetry, who held my hand at my grandmother's funeral. But then I remembered something else, an interview he gave to a local magazine 6 months after our divorce. I'd read it during a weak moment, torturing myself the way you do when you're not quite healed. The interviewer asked about his success, and Garrett said the words that burned themselves into my memory. I built this restaurant from nothing with my own 2 hands. My money, my design, my 7 years of unpaid work, his nothing. I looked at Noreen and asked what we do first. She almost smiled. First, we file a petition to reopen the divorce settlement based on newly discovered evidence and fraud. That's the civil case. Whatever else happens depends on what the investigation reveals. I nodded. For the first time in 14 months, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. Noreen asked if I had any other documents from my grandmother. I told her just recipes and some very angry letters about Nixon that she never mailed. Noreen said the recipes probably wouldn't help our case, but she appreciated a woman who kept thorough records. The legal process started quietly. No dramatic announcements, no public confrontations, just paperwork and patience. Noreen filed the petition to reopen my divorce settlement in week 6. The grounds were straightforward: newly discovered evidence and fraud. I submitted my grandmother's promissory note, along with a detailed statement explaining why I hadn't known about it during the original divorce proceedings. The document had been lost in storage for years, forgotten in the chaos of a marriage ending. This filing was public record, which meant Garrett would find out. Noreen warned me about that from the beginning, but she also said it didn't matter. Once the petition was filed, he'd have to respond through legal channels. No more Instagram statements. No more controlling the narrative. The court doesn't care about public relations. In week 7, Noreen brought in a forensic accountant named Victor Webb. He was in his early 60s, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had spent 30 years examining financial records for fraud cases. He worked on contingency for situations like mine, cases where the evidence of wrongdoing was strong enough that he knew he'd eventually get paid. Victor requested financial discovery as part of the divorce reopening. All restaurant records, bank statements, tax returns, supplier invoices, payroll documents. Garrett's lawyer fought it, of course. Filed motions to delay, claimed the request was overly broad, called it harassment. But the judge granted partial discovery. We got access to bank statements and tax returns going back 5 years. Victor found inconsistencies within days. The restaurant had reported $30,000 in annual profit during my divorce, but the bank deposits told a different story. Revenue was significantly higher than what appeared on the tax returns. Supplier payments didn't match reported food costs. There were regular cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any documented expenses. Classic signs of double bookkeeping, Victor told me. Someone was keeping 2 sets of records, one for the IRS and the courts, one for reality. In week 10, something interesting happened. Noreen received a phone call from Garrett's attorney, a very polite, very professional phone call offering to settle the matter quietly. $30,000, case closed, no admission of wrongdoing. Mr. Holloway simply wanted to avoid prolonged litigation that would be stressful for everyone involved. Noreen presented the offer to me without recommendation. It was my choice. I thought about it seriously. $30,000 was real money. It would pay off my credit cards, give me a cushion, let me breathe a little easier. And accepting it would mean this was over. No more lawyers, no more digging through the past, no more risk. But here's the thing about settlement offers. If someone offers you money to stop looking at their finances, it usually means there's something worth finding. I told Noreen to decline. No counteroffer, no explanation, no drama. Just a polite no thank you through proper legal channels. I found out later that Garrett threw a glass against his office wall when his lawyer delivered the news. Apparently, the charming restaurateur had a temper when things didn't go his way. Funny how you can be married to someone for 7 years and never see that side of them. Or maybe I did see it and just convinced myself it was something else. The decline was the right choice, because in week 11, we got an unexpected gift. A woman named Linda Moretti contacted Noreen's office. She'd seen the local news coverage of my case. The viral video had made it a minor story, and the divorce petition filing had brought it back into the news cycle. Linda said she had information that might be relevant. She wanted to talk. Noreen met with her first, then brought me in. Linda was 58 years old, gray-haired and tired in a way that suggested she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. She'd worked as the general manager at the Amber Table for 5 years. She was there when I was still married to Garrett. She remembered me coming in during the early days, remembered the long hours I put in for free, remembered how the restaurant couldn't have survived without my design work and my grandmother's investment. She also remembered being fired 2 years ago. The official reason was performance issues. The real reason, Linda said, was that she started asking questions about the accounting. She noticed cash transactions that never hit the register, a separate notebook Garrett kept in his office that didn't match the official books, employees being paid partly in cash with instructions not to report it. When she raised concerns, Garrett called her into his office and told her that her services were no longer needed. She was escorted out that same day, after 5 years of loyalty. She didn't even get to say goodbye to the staff she'd trained. Linda had been angry for 2 years. She'd thought about going to the authorities herself, but didn't have enough evidence to prove anything. She was just a fired employee with a grudge. Who would believe her? But now there was an official investigation, legitimate lawyers, someone actually looking into what she'd seen. She gave us everything she had, names of other employees who might be willing to talk, dates and details of cash transactions she'd witnessed, a description of the second ledger system she'd seen in Garrett's office. She even remembered specific nights when the restaurant was packed, but the register showed barely any sales. Most importantly, she was willing to testify. In week 14, Victor Webb completed his forensic analysis. The report was devastating. Based on his examination of the available records, the restaurant had underreported income by at least $150,000 annually. Over the 4 years of our marriage, when the restaurant was profitable, that added up to over $600,000 in unreported income. This wasn't a divorce case anymore. This was tax evasion on a federal scale. Noreen sat me down and explained my options. We could use this evidence as leverage to negotiate a much better divorce settlement and keep everything civil. Garrett would pay me what I was owed, and the tax issues would remain between him and his conscience. Or we could file a formal complaint with the IRS and let federal investigators do what federal investigators do. Option 2 meant I couldn't control what happened to Garrett. If the IRS found criminal conduct, he could face serious consequences. Fines, penalties, maybe prison. I asked Noreen what she would do. She said she couldn't tell me that. It had to be my decision. I went home and thought about it for 2 days. Part of me still felt guilty. Part of me remembered the man I'd loved, the dreams we'd shared, the life we'd built together before it all fell apart. Did I really want to be the person who sent her ex-husband to federal prison? But then I thought about Linda, fired for asking questions. 5 years of her life dismissed in a single afternoon. And I thought about the other employees, the ones who'd been paid under the table, who might have been cheated on taxes or benefits without even knowing it. Garrett's fraud didn't just hurt me, it hurt everyone around him. I called Noreen and told her to file the complaint. She said she'd have it submitted by the end of the week. Then she asked if I was sure. I told her I'd spent 7 years building a restaurant for a man who thanked me by stealing it. The least I could do was make sure he paid his taxes like everyone else. It seemed only fair. I certainly paid mine. This is where everything started moving fast. If you're still with me, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this would be a perfect time. I want you here for how this ends. In week 16, Garrett went on the attack. His lawyer filed a harassment lawsuit against me. The complaint was aggressive and ugly. It accused me of conducting a coordinated campaign to destroy his reputation and business. It cited the wine incident as evidence that I had provoked his wife by showing up at the restaurant uninvited. It claimed I was feeding false information to the media and making anonymous tips to government agencies. The lawsuit made local news again. Restaurant owner accuses ex-wife of harassment campaign. The comments online were brutal. Half the people said I was a bitter woman who couldn't let go. The other half said I was brave for fighting back. Neither side knew the full story. I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me. For about 3 days, I questioned everything. What if I lost? What if his expensive lawyers found a way to twist this around and make me the villain? What if I ended up worse than where I started? Broke? Publicly humiliated? With a harassment judgment on my record? I called Noreen in a panic. She let me talk for about 10 minutes, then said something that calmed me down immediately. Innocent people don't file harassment lawsuits when someone asks to see their tax returns. This is desperation. He's trying to scare you into backing down because he knows what's coming. What was coming arrived in week 18. The IRS opened a formal investigation based on Noreen's complaint. This wasn't automatic. They reviewed our evidence and found it credible enough to pursue a real investigation with real federal agents, looking into everything Garrett had reported for the past 6 years. The investigation was completely separate from my divorce case, but they were connected in an important way. Whatever the IRS found would become part of the public record eventually, and whatever became public record could be used in my civil case. Garrett hired a tax attorney. Then he hired another one. His legal bills were mounting. And unlike me, he couldn't work on contingency. Every hour of every lawyer cost him money he was increasingly desperate to protect. In week 20, Garrett received an official IRS inquiry letter. It was delivered to the restaurant by certified mail. The letter requested all financial records for the past 6 years. Every bank statement, every tax return, every receipt and invoice and payroll document. His accountant called his lawyer. His lawyer called his tax attorney. His tax attorney called another tax attorney. The message was clear. This is serious. Do not destroy anything. Document destruction is a federal crime. I heard about the letter from Noreen, who heard about it through legal channels. She said Garrett's legal team was in full panic mode. They knew what the records would show. The only question now was how much damage they could minimize. But the really unexpected development came in week 22, and it didn't come from me or from the IRS. It came from Brittany. She'd been overhearing Garrett's phone calls for weeks. The hushed conversations with lawyers, the stress, the drinking that had gotten heavier since the investigation started. At first, he brushed off her questions. It's nothing, just the ex causing trouble. Don't worry about it. But Brittany wasn't stupid. Shallow, maybe. Status obsessed, definitely. But not stupid. She started doing her own research, reading about the case online, piecing together what was actually happening. When she finally understood the scope of it, the unreported income, the potential federal charges, the fines that could wipe out everything, she did exactly what you'd expect someone like Brittany to do. She protected herself. In week 22, she filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences. No drama, no public statements, just a quiet filing that showed up in court records. She wanted out before his debts became her debts. The woman who'd thrown wine in my face, who'd screamed about her restaurant and her husband and her blessed life, was running for the exit the moment things got difficult. I wish I could say I was surprised. Garrett was now fighting on 3 fronts. The divorce reopening case against me, the federal investigation by the IRS, and a new divorce from his new wife. His charming empire was crumbling faster than he could hold it together. In week 24, his lawyer gave him the advice that spelled the end. Cooperate with the IRS fighting federal investigators was a losing game that ended in prison time. Cooperating meant fines, penalties, and probation, but probably no jail. The only path forward was to come clean. But here was the trap he'd built for himself. To cooperate with the IRS, he had to admit to the real income figures. And admitting the real income figures meant admitting he'd lied during our divorce. Every lie was connected to every other lie. Pull one thread and the whole thing unraveled. Week 30. I was sitting at my desk working on the final designs for Raymond Talbot's hotel renovation. My phone rang. Noreen? It's done, she said. He agreed to everything. I asked her to repeat that. She explained that Garrett's lawyers had negotiated a global settlement. In the civil case, I would receive 40% of the assessed business value, plus damages for the years of withheld profit sharing. The business was worth less now than it had been before the scandal, around $450,000, but my share still came to approximately $180,000, plus $85,000 in damages and legal costs. Total recovery, roughly $265,000. In the federal case, Garrett pleaded to tax evasion charges, probation, over $200,000 in fines, and a record that would follow him forever. No prison, but his reputation was destroyed. I thanked Noreen. She said I didn't need to thank her. I did the hard part. I hung up and sat quietly for a long time. No champagne, no celebration, no dramatic music swelling in the background. Just relief, like finally putting down something heavy I'd been carrying for years and realizing my shoulders didn't have to hurt anymore. That night I celebrated by ordering takeout from a restaurant that wasn't the Amber Table. The pad thai was mediocre, but at least nobody threw wine on me. Progress. The Amber Table sold 3 months later. Garrett had no choice. The fines and legal fees had drained everything. The restaurant that had been his dream, our dream, the thing I'd designed and funded and built alongside him, went to a restaurant group from out of state. They paid 40 cents on the dollar. Desperation sale. The new owners reached out to me. They'd read about the case and were curious about the woman who'd originally designed the space. Would I be interested in consulting on a refresh? I politely declined. That chapter was closed. Some rooms you don't need to walk back into, no matter how good the lighting is. Let me tell you where everyone ended up, and then I'll let you go. Garrett. Last I heard, he was working at a chain restaurant outside the city, not as a head chef, not even as a sous chef. Kitchen manager, which is a polite way of saying he orders supplies and makes sure the line cooks show up on time. He lives in a 1-bedroom apartment now, and he'll be paying fines and back taxes for years. The man who built this from nothing with his own 2 hands is currently building nothing at all. Brittany. Her divorce from Garrett finalized quickly. There wasn't much to fight over because there wasn't much left. She got nothing because there was nothing to get. I don't know where she is now, and honestly, I don't care. Some stories don't need an ending. Some people are just chapters you close. Linda Moretti, the woman who got fired for asking questions, she used her testimony and documentation to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, settled out of court for an amount she described as enough to finally take that trip to Italy. She sent me a thank you card and a bottle of wine. I kept the card and drank the wine. It was much better than the Merlot Brittany threw at me. Raymond Talbot. He became my biggest client and eventually a friend. His hotel renovation won a regional design award. At the ceremony, he introduced me as the most resilient person he'd ever met. I told him resilience was just stubbornness with better marketing. And me? I used the settlement to open my own design studio. Small space, just me and one assistant, but it's mine. Really mine this time, with paperwork that says so. I specialize in restaurant interiors now. The irony isn't lost on me, but there's something satisfying about it too. I know this world. I know what makes a space work, what makes people want to stay, what makes a room feel like somewhere you belong. I'm not angry anymore. That surprised me most of all. For months during the investigation, I expected to feel triumphant when it was over, vindicated, like I'd won some great battle and could finally plant my flag, but that's not how it felt at all. 6 months after the settlement, I was having coffee at a small cafe near my studio. A young woman at the next table was on her phone, clearly stressed. I could hear fragments of her conversation. Something about her boyfriend wanting her to invest in his business. Something about him promising to pay her back. Something about her not being sure, but not wanting to seem unsupportive. She hung up and stared at her coffee like it might have answers. I don't usually talk to strangers. I don't give advice to people who don't ask for it. But something about her face reminded me of myself at 25. Young, hopeful, absolutely certain that love would be enough to protect her. I caught her eye and smiled. Said just one thing before I paid my bill and left. Whatever you decide, get it in writing. And keep copies. She looked surprised for a moment, then nodded slowly. I don't know if she listened. I hope she did. Walking home that day, I realized something important. I don't think about Garrett anymore. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, not really at all. He's just someone I used to know. A name attached to a story I tell sometimes when people ask about my work or my life or why I always insist on proper documentation. I'm not who I was when I was married to him. I'm not who I was when wine was dripping down my face and 50 people were staring. I'm someone else now, someone I actually like being. The best revenge isn't loud. It's not dramatic confrontations or public humiliation or watching someone grovel. The best revenge is quiet. It's building a life so good that the past becomes just a story. Something that happened once, something you survived, and nothing more. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You'll love it. See you in the next story.